In the world of media, what we create can be seen as a representation of something that the author wanted to express. Songs about feelings, movies about opinions on certain topics, paintings that represent a vision of the world. All of this exists due to the desire of someone to express themselves in a way different than just words, to reach out further. The idea of materializing feelings into something that can be touched, felt, heard, or anything else is one of the most beautiful things that we have as humans. And thus, I always cherish the idea of seeing other people do so. Because to create something to express ourselves can be done by anyone, a lesson people have to be reminded of constantly. Video games also fall into this category, but I think they carry something in their nature that makes them very different in a special way, in that it's not only a piece to be seen, but also a canvas for the one receiving the message to paint. The experience can be transformed, it can change, and the way it will be received transforms drastically because of that. Expression is something that is strongly linked to this form of media in particular, yet it's something that I can't think of a lot of games have tackled directly, besides the one we're focusing on today. Chicory, A Colorful Tale, is in many ways a very unique game to analyze, because of how much of its design is not focused on the usual conventions of gaming, and instead leaves a lot of elements up to the player to decide on how much they want to engage with what the game offers. Yet despite this uniqueness, it still does nail other fundamental aspects that create a memorable game, such as a strong gameplay direction and a story that works in tandem with the game's themes perfectly. Today, I want to praise a game that I believe lives in a space that very few other games occupy, as a place of awakening for something more than just a fun time, or a memorable experience. This is Chicory, A Colorful Tale, and the joy of expression. Defining the style of game that Chicory is can be a little bit strange. The closest and easiest inspiration we can draw from is that the game has roots closely intertwined with the 2D top-down experiences of The Legend of Zelda. A map divided by individual screens, a little bit of freedom in exploration, an emphasis on puzzles, and even having their titles be about characters that aren't the protagonist are all things that connect these two in the basis that they take. But there is a pretty heavy separation that still makes Chicory move away from the massive Nintendo franchise. The easiest one to point out here is that the normal conventions of combat do not exist. The world of Chicory doesn't have enemies, as despite the more fantasy-oriented look of it all, the setting is much closer to real life than the world of heroes and monsters of Zelda. This removal of a fundamental part of the series that inspired it means that there's a massive shift in focus on what the game is going to be about. If there is no combat, then what is the focus? Is it just solving puzzles? Well, no. I think the footage and the game title has already made it pretty clear on where the focus is. Color, the environment, and the way to utilize it. Narratively and mechanically, the brush and its abilities to transform the world are a crucial aspect of the game. Both literally, as it is the main tool you have for traversing the world and solving puzzles, and in a more subtle way, closely related to the actual message that the game is trying to set. A message that defines every single aspect that the game offers, whether that be the story, the core gameplay, the characters that it presents, or anything else. They are trying to tell you something. To feel free to express what you want without judgment, regardless of the vision you have of your own abilities. You should always aim towards just being yourself. Every element that this game has is built upon this foundation, and it's a rabbit hole that goes pretty deep. So allow me to explain certain aspects of the game and the way that the developers went ahead to try and tell you this. I think the best starting point is to see how this peculiar transformation of the average Zelda formula utilizes its strengths to tell you to experiment and be free through tiny pushes. As it's already been addressed, the ability to paint is the glue that holds together the average progression in the game. Besides the singular ability to jump, every power-up that you will obtain is linked to paint, and in so, every puzzle that you have to confront is also related to paint. Creating obstacles, going through tiny corridors, diving in water, or scaling up walls. All of these abilities require either for the surface to already be painted, or for you to understand how this particular obstacle interacts with it. On the surface, it's a pretty straightforward system in terms of functionality, yet at the same time it's already training you for something that you may not notice. and also clearing a very easy misunderstanding that could come from the kind of game this is. The easiest way to explain the former is to think of the ability to move through paint. This is a much faster method of traversal when compared to just walking, but it requires you to do one particular thing, to paint an area. There are plenty of advantages to having most areas in the game be painted. You can often go through locations faster, encounter shortcuts, or even secret paths that might lead to some reward. So of course, you will want to paint almost everything you see. It sounds obvious and like a smart way to go, right? Well, a system such as this can create a negative effect on a game that is trying to tell you to paint what you want. Because if the correct option is to paint, then why not paint everything that matters? While this sounds like a positive at first, there is a lot of work to this game, and if you stop to paint every single location you visit, you will be utilizing a lot of time, and this will most likely end up with you getting bored or annoyed of the mechanic itself. This is why there is a small counterbalance to this style, and that is that not everything wants or will be painted. There's a couple of environmental features that will stop you from being able to paint everything, and they appear as soon as the first area of the game, telling you about how this game about painting isn't about painting everything, but instead painting what you want or need. As you may have noticed by my footage, I like to be very messy in the way I throw my colors around. I like to paint as much as I can, but I'm also aware of the kind of person I am, so I know that I shouldn't dwindle too much if I don't want to bore myself. It's something that every person is going to tackle differently, and that the game respects properly, instead of forcefully trying to get you to paint in one particular style. The level of freedom that the game offers is a part of why it's so freeing as an experience to traverse, something accompanied by the very relaxing and straightforward puzzle design the game has. It sometimes requires you to stop for a second and think about the challenge in front of you, but it never puts you under pressure, so you can take your time and be as methodical or experimental as you want. There are no super tricky jumps or very tight execution windows. It's all just solving what's in front of you by taking your time, a time you can also utilize to paint anything you want if you feel like. A curious thing I noticed too is that rooms are for the most part self-contained. Most puzzles are about what's in front of you, or something that interacts with the room right next to it, and even those are a rarity, all things considered. Another part I want to mention about this game is something that is usually core to the Zelda experience, but that it can't really be translated literally into Chicory: exploration and secrets. Side objectives are a big portion of the time length in a Zelda playthrough, with many rooms, quests, and secrets to find that are completely optional, but giving you something that anyone who sees can understand why you would want. A reward to help you in the combat scenarios that you're going to be put on. Heart pieces, more magic, useful side items, more bottles for heals, weapon upgrades. Every upgrade in Zelda, and the incentive to find them is that they will make the rest of your experience easier by making you stronger. But how do you do that in a game where there is no need to be stronger? Every major upgrade in Chicory is linked to the story progression. So what is all this exploration for? Well, the answer is both surprisingly simple yet incredibly interesting to think about in terms of functionality. Just like the combat was shifted for a different side focused on expression, the rewards that you can obtain are also inherently related to you expressing yourself. In other words, the reward for your curiosity is the ability to represent yourself and anything you make better. There's 3 types of rewards you can find while exploring Chicory: clothing that will let you personalize the protagonist to suit your own style, furniture which you can place all around the world of Picnic for a chance of other NPCs visiting the screen, and the most important one, brush tiles, which change the shape of your brush so you can do some more specialized shapes. It's not hard to tell immediately that, from a functionality standpoint, nothing here is an upgrade of relevance. There's no objective advantage to utilizing any of these features, and for the most part, the few times you need to use some of these, such as furniture, it's only for side quests that will reward you even more pieces for you to utilize. So why should the average player care? Well, I think that's something that the developers of this game understood better than just following the more logistical side of designing. What kind of player will play this game, and what would they want to do in this world? I am not someone who's interested in cosmetics in gaming. In most games that let me change my character around, I kind of just pick something from the start and never change, because fashion has never been something I'm interested in, and therefore not something that was my strong suit either. Yet in Chicory I find myself constantly switching around outfits because it was fun to find them. It was a reward that went perhaps beyond the average convention of what a usual reward for a game like this would be. Mind you, I'm not calling this system revolutionary or anything. I am more than aware that many other games have cosmetic and other non-gameplay related rewards linked to their systems, but Chicory is the only game that made me feel like doing a push further beyond just finding my outfit. Like I wanted to celebrate the new reward I just got every time I found a gift. Now, I will admit that furniture in particular didn't quite hit the same level for me as clothing, probably because that requires a level of dedication that I don't have to make many individual rooms pretty. But on the other side, some specific brush styles really feel like massive rewards, with two in particular that I always look forward to getting. So having your own signature brush styles that you can throw around everywhere is one of my favorite things in Chicory. All in all, the core foundation of Chicory's gameplay is both incredibly solid and also fascinating to look at, transforming the conventional exploration for upgrades into rewards focused on creativity and new ideas, something that is very much accentuated by the parts of the game that don't follow the basic Zelda formula. A part of the game that matters just as much, if not more in certain ways when we consider what the game is all about. In 2022, the director of this game, Greg Lovanov, did a GDC talk about the concept of gamifying creativity, link in the description, where he talks a lot about the different challenges that he and his team had to deal with when it came down to the concept of making the game about art, with one of the main obstacles being how to motivate the player to draw. It's an interesting talk about how players tend to prefer optimization and ratings over expression, and how trying to objectify the art is antithetical to what the expression behind it is supposed to be. I mention all of this because a lot of the small details in the way Chicory functions can be seen as solutions to the problem of how to make the player experiment with art. From the moment you grab the brush, you realize that no matter the location, you have access to only 4 different colors, and those colors change depending on the area you're in. This is a super limited palette that you have no control over, but it's of most importance to note that what color you pick doesn't matter in the context of objective gameplay. You can go around everywhere utilizing a single color, and it will be okay, but I think I speak for most when I mention that it doesn't seem right to just drown a whole part of the map in the same color scheme. Another advantage that having only 4 colors gives is removing the dreadful decision paralysis. Something that genuinely happens often to people while painting is to not know how to use colors beyond the logic of the real world. But you can really use logic when your palette is so limited, so if you were to actually use the colors given to you, chances are you will end up with some experimental options, which I think are perfect for you to just get accustomed to the way colors combine. This goes even further with the side quests, and in particular and most noticeably in the painting sections that the game has. You will be asked to draw a prompt or a concept or sometimes to recreate an already existing piece. The pool of options for color available is bigger, but the way the options are distributed will most likely guide you towards a certain direction with the colors. And perhaps the most important thing of all, you'll never receive a color that is dark enough to be used as black, let alone actual black. This matters a lot in the context of how black is generally the color you utilize for outlines, and while working in black and white is perfectly valid, the goal of the game is about painting, and utilizing the color is a part of it. This makes you think about what is the appropriate color to utilize, instead of going for what is for many the safe option that is just black and white. This concept of limited options is extremely noticeable on the pieces you have to recreate, as despite being something you're trying to copy, you now have to think about it in a different light, because you have no guides about how it's supposed to be colored. It's kinda genius in many ways. And about those recreations, this is where you'll most likely notice something that was there from the start, but you probably didn't quite realize it up until now. The brush, and your ability to control it, are not great for precision. In fact, it's kind of a really bad tool for what its intended purpose is supposed to be. I haven't delved into the story just yet, but something that you will quickly be able to tell is that the protagonist, the individual who is utilizing the brush, is someone who is completely new to the world of art, with no experience doing anything like this before, and this is translated in their, and our, ability to wield the brush. You will be given these pieces that you can see other artists made before, but your tools are an obstacle. They won't let you replicate it exactly as it is, which is a huge relief to the mental stress that these art sections will put you in otherwise. If you were given the actual settings for a precise brush, you were shown the color scheme of the original pieces, this whole section will, for some people, go from a relaxing experience drawing what you can, to the frustrating realization that the player most likely can't replicate these pieces of art because they don't have the ability to do it yet. Limiting the set of tools is not only important for leaving space for the player to be creative, but also for them to see that the game never expected them to be a phenomenal artist with years of experience. This game is meant to be a path towards an interesting expression through art, not the main tool to do it. Something worth noting about these paintings is that you will receive comments about each piece that you submit to the art classes. Everyone will comment about it, with the teacher putting out some technical aspect of your painting, such as color usage or which part of the canvas you use less or more, but there is no score or overall result that you can change by doing something specific. This was also a conscious decision, as it avoids a common issue that can be born out of rating art. You can't really rate it in a way that's fair because there is no baseline for rating art in a game like this. This is something that Greg Lobanov also mentioned in his GDC about the game, trying to avoid the negative effects that such a system can add that go against the idea of just making what you want. As you can see, there is a high level of care and attention in this game towards not trying to alienate its player from art. All of these systems that passively motivate you to draw, that try to avoid judging you, that give you space to just express what you want. It's a crucial part of the experience that makes it stand out so much, and that also understands the struggle that people trying to make art can have, which is something that the game shows in a much more deeper and personal level in its story about the protagonist and Chicory, which are in many ways the parallels of an artist. There is a desire that most people have about their existence in this world, to leave a mark in it, no matter how big or small, to have something that they can point as their legacy in a way, to do something that mattered. A perfectly natural desire when we consider our limited time in this existence, to feel like we did something that could change things. In the world of Picnic, the role of a wielder is one of the most important ones out there, one who's in charge of carrying the legendary brush that is capable of coloring the world. A tool that has been passed down for generations, with the latest wielder being the person who Pizza works for, Chicory, a bunny who is praised for their incredible talent as an artist. In the middle of Pizza's clean duty as a janitor, where we can see a tiny preview of the amazing colors that Chicory has placed, we suddenly see all of it disappear right in front of our eyes, and when Pizza goes to try to tell Chicory, she seems to be missing in action, and the brush being left there. Curiosity wins over Pizza, and they decide to take the brush and utilize it, something that would normally be strictly forbidden, so they act like Chicory was the one who gave it to them. The introduction of the game gives us a great reference of who Pizza is as a character, and of who Chicory is supposed to be, what the outside sees in her. To the news of a new wielder coming around, the world reacts openly to this new development, albeit with most people being a bit confused, with this obviously being something that came out of nowhere. Pizza soon finds themselves in front of the old master of Chicory, Blackberry, who is quick to blame Chicory for the situation with the color, and sends Pizza to clean the mess she left. This is as far as the summary goes, as the only reason why I have decided to do it for this particular game is for the sake of comparing this early game context with everything that will eventually come. We already find contradiction information of who Chicory is, with a master that seems very harsh on her, and that doesn't seem to believe in her capabilities as Pizza does. This is something that matters a lot once Chicory appears in the picture, and we start to learn about the kind of person she really is. Chicory being in the title is already a giveaway, but the story of this game is as much about Pizza as it is about her, as they show different issues and fears that may perhaps hit close to some people. Expectations and imposter syndrome. Chicory is a talented artist from the start, but for a big portion of the game we see that she herself does not believe this to be a fact. She is blind to her own talent because the person who taught her about this, Blackberry, was someone who planted expectations of this perfection she had created about herself, and wanted her successor to have. This marks Chicory in a way that has haunted her ever since the one event that finally separated her from Blackberry, the trial where she was the one to receive her approval. Every piece she makes, everything she paints, has to reach this standard of quality that was taught to her, an impossible standard that keeps pestering her mind. More than once we hear about Chicory apparently painting something and then erasing it and starting again many times over, dissatisfied with the result. In this attempt of making her reach the perfection she envisioned, Blackberry made Chicory into a perfectionist who could never feel satisfied with her job, which quickly poisoned her passion for painting and warped her mind into a depressive state where she couldn't believe herself to be talented. How could she, when she couldn't even accomplish what her master wanted her to do? Chicory is at the top, yet at this top she cannot see her triumphs because they are behind all of this fog that her mind has created from being taught poorly. This goes beyond just affecting her desire to paint, as it creates this mentality of everything being her fault, blaming herself for things that go outside of her own. The corrupted trees she constantly blames herself for are a manifestation of a deeper issue that the Wielders have gone through, but in her mind, there is no doubt about the fundamental problem here being her. She is the one that everyone expects to fix things. She is the one who Blackberry trained. Why can't she do it? Pizza, on the other hand, has no expectations from everyone. Even after Chicory learns about them getting the brush, she doesn't really care about it. They just want it gone, so Pizza is free to do whatever they want, without the fear of being judged in the way that Chicory was, which should be a relief, right? Well, kinda, but for that we have to understand the roles of a teacher, to guide their student, to show them that they are on the right path. Pizza does what an exemplar wielder should do in terms of actions for everyone. They help others, grant the world colors, and go out of their way to find solutions to the problem Picnic has, all while still trying to solve the issue of the corruption. It's a tough job that Pizza even admits to being daunting, yet they have never really learned to say no. They just get pushed around by everyone telling them their problems because that's what the wielder is for in this world. Yet Pizza withstands it fine. The one thing Pizza cannot leave behind, however, is what we mentioned about the circumstances of them getting the brush. The idea of Chicory giving them the brush because she considered Pizza an appropriate person to wield her, that this wasn't just a series of coincidences that led to Pizza being the wielder. Pizza is constantly in denial about this situation, because in their mind, their accomplishments are outweighed by the mere circumstance of why they are here to begin with. It could have been anyone instead of them that got the brush and helped out others. They aren't important as a person, and could never accomplish this without just being lucky. In other words, they're also a person who cannot see what they have accomplished, but instead of the issue being perfectionism, it's the necessity to feel like they have an inner talent that someone saw in them. Throughout the entire adventure, you will get many opportunities to have Pizza interact with other characters, especially Chicory, and I think this provides some phenomenal insight in the mind of someone who is trapped in self-doubt about their own worth. A lot of the dialogue here seems to come from a place of sincerity, perhaps a reflection of the thoughts that the people behind this game had at some point about their own work. It is especially noticeable with the heart-to-hearts Pizza and Chicory have, where each one unveils the fears they have, while also trying to make the other one feel better about the situation. It's a budding relationship between two people who find themselves in a scenario they didn't ever expect to be in, so all they can really do is brace themselves and hope for the best. I love seeing these two talk about their issues, as in many ways they both have something the other thinks they lack, something that blocks them and weighs them down. It's why the process of seeing these two characters grow can be so comfortable to see, because it's a natural friendship born out of an understanding of the position the other is. From beginning to end, we see Chicory fight with herself, needing to speak about her issues to slowly release them, which eventually leads to the realization that she isn't the cause of everything, and slowly accepts herself as who she is. Pizza, on the other hand, struggles with her own issue for a while, and it's something that Chicory cannot fix because the only person who can accept the situation is Pizza themselves. This reaches to the point where it chases after them even in the final encounter in the game, causing them to lose the battle and for everything to seem like a failure. They are only able to overcome this wall in a final conversation with Chicory, clearing their mind once and for all, and giving them the tool they needed to tackle this final challenge. A tool that Chicory, and in reality everyone in the world of Picnic, had access to, but that they needed to clear their mind and aim towards. The symbolism of literally any person being able to create a brush tree and painting is not something I need to get into detail. Anyone can make art, and no lack of a proper title shall stop you from doing so. The world is yours to color. Yet to this simple message, there is a satisfying honesty to it. The game has been bending towards this idea throughout the entire game. The concept of pizza proving that there wasn't a need for this formality or capability because at the core of it all, everyone can transform the world, and the responsibility of it should be for everyone to carry. It might be very cliché in many senses, but hey, if it makes for a satisfying conclusion, I'm on board. Yet the story isn't exclusively about Chicory and pizza now, is it? I already mentioned Blackberry, but everything I mention about her puts the character in a bad light, which the game purposefully does for a big portion of the game, until the final part where we learn about how this dismissive behavior towards Chicory is born of her own personal grief and failure. Blackberry didn't aim to be a bad influence towards Chicory, she just taught her the ways she considered was correct. An incorrect assumption, but not a malicious one. The game never absolves her of the mistakes she makes, however, and I think this is important to mark as she handled everything after her incident with Chicory very poorly, and the game still remembers this. Despite this, however, Blackberry is also a great example of the effect that the brush has on the wielder, how it encapsulates everything both positive and negative that they feel, and it was the generations of negativity that in the end caused all of the issues that the main story presents. The source of all the fundamental problems was the way this legacy of artists was created, and how it warped the brush from a tool the first wielder created to express something into a title filled with expectations and constant work to be performed by a single individual. The transformation of art into an exhausting activity that nobody wants to do. The boss fights in this game are essentially manifestations of everything that the brush has carried. The other side of the legacy of the wielder. All the negativity accumulated and manifested into these monsters with no clear form, that cannot be destroyed, just contained, as the core of the issue lives on for so long, up until the end of the game. They reflect the different aspects of negativity contained in the brush, my favorite being the fight that is connected to Blackberry, as not only does it provide insight in her character by way of them literally spouting the fears and thoughts that she felt back when Chicory ran away, but also because the attack patterns are structured to fit the character who the fight is about. Her attack patterns are precise, they all have this diamond shape or are perfect lines. There are no imprecisions in her way of attacking, which helps make the boss fight easier to understand, and also creates a great symbolism of this perfectionism she has always sought. You can find this kind of detail in literally every boss fight in the game, which combined in how you can customize their difficulty or even straight up skip them, speaks to me about how even these supposed gameplay sections are much more directed towards the side of telling a story, for these characters and nightmares to show themselves, as opposed to just an obstacle to defeat. Chicory, A Colorful Tales story focuses on the effects that a legacy of misunderstanding what art is supposed to be has caused, and about this new pair of friends who try to finally put an end to this endless cycle that has caused so much grief to the wielders of the past. It's a story that works on many levels, and I think a lot of it has to do with the high amounts of attention to detail that the game received in how its world setting and narrative was structured. The world of Picnic is an interesting place to explore, and I think it deserves a mention in order to understand what makes it such a lovable place to be in. The picture of the world that Picnic presents can feel like a smaller iteration of our own. It's a place filled with so many different people, with thoughts and issues that can be considered silly, comforting, or even sad in many ways. Sidequests being a tool to present the world is a common tactic in gaming, but I think this game in particular does a phenomenal job in showing the many different shades it has. You have smaller scale stories, such as this very obviously adult character who asks if they can have your license so they can explore the world, and you can find their very adult life thanks to this. You have a silly mystery to solve about a potential thief who ends up revealing themselves out of guilt despite us literally being unable to solve the mystery. But there is also a tale about an old man reminiscing about the world he once visited, and how the memories he had lost their color, wishing to see these places now with their own colors. Perhaps one of the most memorable side stories to me is one focused on someone who's grieving over the loss of their friend. To remember them, they asked us if we have any plans that we could place here, as his friend was someone who loved caring for them. It's a very simple side quest in terms of structure, one of the few place to decorations that they ask you for quest that the game has. But just the premise itself, the music that plays in this area makes it feel very different. It's a very melancholic quest, where you help someone move on from their loss. They even react overwhelmed once you put enough plans, and need some time before being able to respond. It's a very personal quest in some ways, and easily my favorite of them all. There's a lot of tiny stories to the world like this. Most characters have a side to them that you get to enjoy. They make Picnic feel like a place that goes beyond just the place for the wielder to paint, because many of these issues, despite being solved by the wielder, are unrelated to the actual brush, and instead being more focused about the lives of these characters. Combine this with more visual decisions, such as characters having different fonts to represent them better, and you have a depiction of the world that has a lot of charm that goes beyond just being a comfortable world for you to exist. You know what? Screw it, here's some of my highlights. There's Means, a cat lady who lost her children after all the color disappeared, and ends up helping out taking care of every other missing cat that you find, giving you some furniture afterwards. It's a fun side quest on its own, but there's a bit more to it. If you also do a side quest about delivering mail, you will meet with this character, Pepper, who is also looking for her child, and the main mentions that someone has found it. Turns out, Beans found it, and in exchange for helping her find her kid, Pepper decides to stay and help out. If you interact with them, you will notice how both seem to really enjoy each other's company, and it's a very cute addition. But if you go even further in the mailing quest, you will soon have to give a mail to the prettiest girl in Luncheon. If you go and deliver this to Beans, it turns out it's actually a confession of love from Pepper. I love this so much, it's such a lovable yet simple quest. Another one I really like comes from this bird here, Peppermint. She's a huge fan of your work, and she really seems to appreciate everything you do. It's very charming. Late into the game, you find her again, and she shows you fan art she made of your art. Now obviously this is just our piece with a few filters on, but the idea of someone just loving your art so much to this point is so genuinely charming to me. I love it. Lastly, I do want to mention Clementine, Dad, and Mom. Everyone is so supportive of one another, with Mom being very emotional and Dad perhaps struggling a bit to say things, but still trying his best to show his support. Clementine too even gets a scene with Pizza to try and help them wind down, to let Pizza speak her mind and give them some advice to tackle the situation. There's a lot to this perhaps tiny world in scale that makes it feel huge. Radish, one of the few people willing to point out how crude your art is, in the end apologizes because the only reason she did that was because she saw Pizza as someone who was just given a privilege she always worked towards. And her story doesn't reach a perfect ending, but instead it transforms into a story about someone who will still live happily, despite not having everything go her way. It's bitter, but also very real. Something else that helps in creating this atmosphere, of course, is the music that accompanies every environment that is present in this game. Lena Raine is a name that is going to be recognized by many, as she is the composer of the speedrunner renowned game Celeste. Now I must admit that personally I have never been super drawn towards the soundtrack of Celeste, although a few tracks in the game do really stand out to me, but the fact that she was the composer of this game was never a selling point to me. That being said though, I can happily say that the soundtrack of Chicory is more or less perfect for the game that it is. It encapsulates the many different scenarios, not only of the land you're exploring, but of the many different events that play out in it. It's grandiose when exploring through a bustling city. It's relaxing when you're hanging out in the town you grew up in. Melancholic when visiting a temple that represents the legacy of the wielder. Strong and impactful when confronting the evil that is contained in the trees. And exciting when we see that we finally have a shot to save everything. You can actually read many of the thoughts that Lena Rain had while making the music of Chicory in the post she made, titled Composing for Chicory, Motives and Memories. Again, I highly suggest you go check it out if you're interested in the topic. It's very insightful for anyone who wants to learn a bit of what goes through the mind of a musician when trying to think about music for a game. And it goes to show what I appreciate the most about the soundtrack, even more than perhaps the actual music, the sheer amount of attention that everything was given to it. I think that at this point of the video, I'm hoping I've been able to show how it exists in everything that this game has. Unlike my other videos about Mystery Dungeon and Castlevania, I made this video with what is perhaps a silly but still strong wish in my heart. I wanted this video to reach the people who made Chicory into a reality. When you 100% the game, you can find messages from the developers of the game, each one telling you how it was to make this game, the difficult journey that it was, but that they hope will reach other people. Greg Lovanov in particular mentions how they connect to the player despite never knowing each other. That the experience that they expressed through this game that you just played was something that managed to create a connection between both. I want to thank everyone who made this game for creating something like this. Art can be hard to understand from the outside, something that can be misunderstood by people who don't have any experience. New artists, veteran artists, everyone has their own struggles in this always advancing world. Yet we're sometimes foolish enough to drown in our own self-doubt before anything has happened. It's important to treasure what you do, and to trust in what you can accomplish. No matter how good or bad you believe you are at what you do, you shouldn't be afraid of expressing yourself through this, or any other medium. It's a message that becomes more and more important in a world where people we don't know anything at all can still get to us. Create things that make you happy. Perhaps even show them to the world if you're willing to do so. It can be a scary prospect, but I think the more people get to represent their feelings in an expressive way such as this, the more the world will be able to understand itself. The more we will be able to understand each other. Thank you for your time, and remember, we can always try to learn to be a better version of ourselves.